Hey everybody, Goo Man here with part 2 of the freshly rebranded new Monster Roundup series for Monster Hunter Wilds, where I look at all the new monsters who were introduced in this title. I'm talking about what I liked, what I disliked, and anything else that comes to mind. We are going through the monsters in the order they are introduced in the game. So in part 1 we looked at the Chatacabra, the Chemitrice, and Lala Barina. In this video I will be talking about the Balahara, the Doshaguma, and Uth Duna. If you happen to come across my video randomly, hey, thanks for being here. Be sure to subscribe and say hi in the comments below. That'll help me out a lot. And without further ado, let's get started. The first monster we're looking at here today is the Balahara, the sandworm. Its core gameplay gimmick is the way it interacts with the immediate environment. In this case, it is burrowing into the sand, create a massive pit. While the pit is actively forming, the sand will kind of get in the way of your movement, forcing you to kind of put your weapon away and run around a little bit so you can get to a safer spot. The Balahara is also the first monster in Wilds to use projectiles as an attack, which does add a unique kind of challenge that a new player might not have experienced quite yet. It is also the first monster in this game that can make itself untargetable by digging into the sand. I think one of the things that can make the Balahara quite a bit dangerous is whenever it attacks with its tail, the telegraphs aren't super clear right away. It takes quite a bit of getting used to recognize when it's about to do a wide sweeping attack versus a leaping lunge, which is one of its stronger attacks that it can do. It does like to use its projectile attacks a lot. The key to dealing with monsters like that is to just stay aggressive, get close to him, and just keep attacking. Staying close will force the monster AI to go for the more clearly telegraphed melee attacks versus some of the quicker ranged attacks that might give you trouble, as well as give you status effects that you might want to avoid. I like this fight quite a bit. At first I thought this fight was a little annoying, especially during the beta. I was kind of getting sick of it. But the more I spent time in the full launch of the game, the more I really do appreciate this guy. The Balahara does teach players how to pay attention to your surroundings and first be cautious of how the environment can be used against you, and more importantly, how you can use the environment to your advantage. You might remember during the opening sequence of the game, you're riding your Sacred in the on-rails chasing section, and you're made to grab screamer pods from the flying birds that are above you, and use that to repel the herd of Balahara that's chasing your character. And that can play a role when you fight the monster for real. The Screamer Pod isn't the most widely useful item in the game in its current state. However, it is designed specifically for monsters like the Balahara that can burrow itself under the ground. I don't have that much else to say about this fight. I think its relative simplicity is its strength. It's a pretty solid fight that does exactly what it needs to, which is give new players a chance to experience how a monster could potentially use the world as its own sandbox. I think the Balahara does that very well. I wouldn't change much about this fight. I'm very happy with how it is. So this guy should remind you that you're fighting these monsters on their home turf. Their ability to bend the environment to their will to try to take you down is only limited by the imagination of the designers. The next monster we're going to be looking at here is the Doshaguma. Now, after so many hours in the betas, it does feel a little bit weird to fight this guy in the Scarlet Forest, but hey, here we are. This is where it's introduced. I think when it comes to monsters that you can just duke it out with, just kind of slam your face against the controller while you're practicing a new weapon or something. I think the Doshaguma might be my favorite monster to do that with. I really like its moveset. It feels weighty. Its attacks hit hard, but they're not super complicated or confusing at all. It's very clear what it's trying to do. It telegraphs very clearly, but the attacks themselves still come at you fast, so you're still forced to kind of think on your feet, figure out how you want to react in a given situation. I think this monster is really well designed. I like it a lot, even if it looks a little bit plain by Monster Hunter standards. There is one move that always kind of trips me up, where it rears up and scooches to its side before charging at you. And the timing to do your blocks and dodges on that move is still a little bit confusing to me. But figuring that one out does feel pretty good. Overall, though, this fight isn't super complicated. I don't have a whole lot I can say about this fight that I think will add to what you can just kind of plainly experience just by fighting it. I'm a big fan of its sort of interesting enraged form where it gets so angry that it opens up all the wounds that you're building up on it, and using all that damage and pain it's build up throughout your fight to kind of fueling like a super angry form. I think that's a really neat little touch to the monster's personality. It's really unsettling in the best way, and I'm a big fan of the monster because of it. Once it's angry enough, it gains the strength to even move the earth beneath you and kind of throw the ground at you, which is a type of power that's usually reserved for later game monsters in previous Monster Hunter games. So I'm glad the Doshaguma got the honor of essentially a Rajang this early in the game. But yeah, this is a very classic brawler style fight. I like it just the way it is. I don't really have a whole lot else to say about it. I'm glad it's here. This fight does remind me quite a bit of Arzuros, which is a pretty old monster. It made its return in Monster Hunter Rise, which was the previous game in the series. It was another early game bear-type monster, but the Doshaguma is infinitely more interesting, I think. It has way more moves at its disposal. The sort of alternate enraged mode adds a fun aesthetic twist to it. If you're trying out a new weapon and you need a good buddy to spar with, then I say start with the Doshaguma. So the last monster we're looking at today is the Uth Duna. This monster is our first taste of an Apex monster for each of the regions. The first time we fight this fight, it is considered a repel quest, so we don't quite get to finish the fight on our own terms. However, after the first mission, the Uth Duna is unlocked for regular hunts. We were given some truly excellent Leviathans in this game, so it's very exciting. Very good time to be a fan of snaky monsters. While the Uth Duna is surrounded by what looks like large fin-like appendages, like you see here, it is protected by something like a temporary damage shield. The game calls it a water veil. If you care about the ecology, it's made up of oils and body secretions that the monster produces. The first goal here when you start fighting it is to do enough damage to break the shield, basically, as it were. The veil itself does act like a secondary combat form, so the moveset does seem to change. While the Uth Duna is veiled, it tends to use its weight a little bit more, so it'll slam itself down on bodies of water to create wave effects that will get in the way of you. I find that each time you break its veil, it usually just happens to coincide with the phase of the fight where the monster is a little bit more tired anyway. So I think the idea here is that while it's veiled, you have to deal with a particularly more aggressive monster and kind of have to play a bit more defensively and then just chip away at its shield. And if you can stay vigilant on that, if you can keep yourself protected while taking pot shots at its shield, you'll be rewarded with a very long window of time where you can kind of go all out and do as much damage as you can. Another thing about this fight that you don't see too often in Monster Hunter games is the way it uses water as part of its movement. I think this is really cool. So often enough, you'll see monsters with elemental powers. They'll like produce the element directly to do damage to you. The Uth Duna can't do that. It doesn't like shoot water at you or anything. It doesn't do like the Mizutsune water beam and inflict you with water blight or anything like that. That's not the way it fights. It only really applies the water effect to its own body. Otherwise, it just relies on the environment, really, which is neat. Rather than kind of producing like a jet of water to do damage, it slams down on existing water to create a wave. And every time it creates the wave, it kind of forces you to reposition, since the whole point is to push you away and get you out of like your big damage combos and stuff. It does make the fight a little bit easier than if it could just throw water at you to do big damage. But I think this is a fun way to incorporate, number one, environmental effects and having to deal with something that's not directly related to like a monster's attack in a way that doesn't necessarily punish you too heavily if you mess up, since all it really does is push you away. I'm not a huge fan of that body slam move. the hitbox for the attack animation starts the moment it lifts off. So it's a little bit deceptive exactly when it's dangerous to be there. Like you just saw, I got hit on its way up, and you're usually looking for the monster on its way down, right? Like it's a body slam attack, so you're kind of watching out for when it's in the air. You're not necessarily expecting it to do big damage and knock you back when it's slowly snaking its way into the sky. So I'm not a huge fan of that very small thing. It's not a huge deal. It's just something, an extra consideration you have to make. I think one of my favorite aspects of this fight is that it kind of takes you all across the map. Obviously, Uth Duna needs to fight near water to be effective. There are several spots in the Scarlet Forest with pretty large bodies of water, and the fight does make use of all of them. I think it's neat that this monster just kind of gets to have its own arenas in a map that already exists. Now, I do assume that in the first title update, when Mizutsune comes out, that fight will fully utilize the big water zones in this map as well. That's a pretty safe bet. But for now, we can enjoy our grudge match against this big ol' snake in its own little arena. While the veil's up, the body slams and its water attacks are a lot more deadly. The monster guide in game describes the veil as sort of like an appendage that adds extra weight. That's why whenever it does like a slam that shoots water at you, there's a little extra explosion that happens at the start of those attacks. That's why you might be getting hit with damage. When it comes to the moveset of the monster, I don't think it's too complicating. The biggest attacks, like this one, are pretty clearly telegraphed. Anytime the monster kind of rears up to go into the air or slam down, obviously it's a very dangerous thing that you want to avoid. Like that body slam. And then otherwise, most of its other attacks consist of swipes, slams with its hands. The fight doesn't really force you to think about what it's doing. It's very much, reacting to cues kind of fight. That's a cool transition. I like that a lot. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this monster. It uses the environment in a way that you don't see very often from monsters in these games. I like the idea of the monster using the water element mostly as a defensive thing instead of purely like a weapon. I think that's a fun twist on the idea of environmental hazards. I think the difficulty of its combat mechanics are scalable in that if they were to bring this fight back in the master rank, they'll be able to pull off something really crazy and scary here, right? Because water isn't the only liquid thing that can ripple. So I hope Capcom uses this fight as a test case for using the environment in more creative ways than just as an arena or an arena with traps. Like this fight is enhanced by the presence of water on a map, and that is really cool. I like that a lot, and I'm glad they sort of did this experiment. And yeah, I can't wait to see more. Not necessarily of this monster specifically, though I would not mind, but I hope there will be more monsters like the Uth Duna, in different locales and stuff. So, in summary, Uth Duna, the first Apex monster you fight in Monster Hunter Wilds, solid. I like it. Great job. The Uth Duna kind of marks the end of the very basic of beginner monsters, and we'll be making our way through some of the more medium tier in terms of difficulty. So I'll be curious to know if you want to sound off in the comments below. What are your thoughts on the first few monsters that we looked at so far, and how you feel like they introduced you to this new game in the series? Anyway, that's it from me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in part 3, where we finally look at some of the monsters that were added in the Oil Well Basin.